now. And the second item on the agenda is citizen comments. These are comments from citizens for items that are not on the agenda, and I understand that Daniela Kuntz would like to come and make some remarks to last no longer than 5 minutes, please. Introduce yourself and
Okay.
have at it.
I'm Daniela Kuntz, and I'm a citizen of the United States of America.
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm Daniela Kuntz, and I live here in Franklin. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, and I have been working on the issue of the water fluoridation for a couple of years. I have been researching on it, and I've been trying to also get in touch with Mayor Schroer back then when he was in office, and apparently it was not an issue that was really considered important back then, but now with the media that just covered about Spring Hill not fluoridating anymore the waterways, I thought it's important to bring it up again. So I'm here again, and I would like to just reiterate on why fluoridation is not safe as a lot of people think it is, and it is more and more information is coming out about the health risks. Its limited cavity fighting abilities is overstated, and I mean understated, and it's just not doing its job as it was supposed to. And especially because when it's added to the water, it's being ingested instead of being applied topically, where the fluoride should be actually be put and not ingested. And by ingesting that chemical compound, it actually does accumulate in the body and provokes a lot of health effects like brittle bones, dental fluorosis, skeletal fluorosis, and it interferes with the thyroid gland, the pineal gland, and kidneys. It has a lot of health effects that are very dangerous to people, especially on children also. And I'm sorry, I'm nervous. The water fluoridation itself is the only substance that is being added to the waterways as a means of medication for the population. And this addition is done without first obtaining consent of citizens. And fluoridation also assumes a one-size-fits-all approach, not taking into account variations in people's total dose ingested or people's varying health status. And it is also not being measured and monitored on how people respond, their health on it. And it is violating fundamental principles of toxicology, pharmacology, and ethics. And a lot of dentists still insist that it is a healthy thing to do. What they forget is that it should not be ingested, and but just topically applied, which can be also be done with toothpaste, which has fluoride in it, and it can be spit out, and that would cover for that need. And it doesn't need to be put in water for everybody for a lifetime, every day. It doesn't make sense, and I think it just needs to be stopped.
Thank you for coming.
And I have all the documentation. May I leave this with you? So if you want
Sure,
to
and
study
if you'll
it,
just leave them there, and we will have them passed out in
Sure.
everybody's mailbox.
Right. About the costs, I forgot to mention about the costs, maybe, if I have a
Sure,
minute.
go ahead.
the true costs are probably not being fully considered. It may be a little fraction of cost per person that it reflects if one would not fluoridate the water anymore. But it is the costs of the equipment and the chemicals itself is not as much, but it needs to be also considered that the cost of lobbying and promoting fluoridation, the cost of treating and repairing dental fluorosis, for example, and the cost of health effects like broken hips on members of the population, and the cost of obtaining low fluoride water for bottle-fed infants or for others who prefer to avoid fluoride. It just is something that needs to be considered too.
Thank you for your comments.
Okay.
If you'll leave those, we'll make sure everybody gets one in their mailbox.
Okay.
Items number 3, 4, and 5, we're going to consider together if there's no opposition. These are event permit applications. Is everybody? Thank you. Is everybody good with 3, 4, and 5? Okay. Well, we have an issue with one of our presenters not being here quite yet, so we're going to skip number 6 and hold it for a few minutes. We're going to item number 7, consideration of acquisition and development of the 84 Lumber Site as a consolidated public works facility, a resolution of intent to purchase property for consolidated public works facility, and a resolution declaring the intent of the City of Franklin to reimburse itself for certain expenditures related to public works projects for the proceeds of bonds or other debt obligations to be issued by the City of Franklin. Mr. Stuckey.
I'd like to go through this. I have a presentation that also would like to provide to you tonight. It covers a lot of the material that was submitted to the board, and I want to apologize in advance. This information did not come out as timely as we'd like it to. It came out yesterday, but we were waiting to get some information to help complete the picture, and we didn't receive it till about middle of the day yesterday ourselves. So again, I apologize for that, but would like to take you through these items tonight and just help facilitate the discussion, and then we'll go wherever you would like to go on this issue. Let me pull up that presentation. I want the PowerPoint. Basically, what we're asking tonight, the two items that are really on for consideration for the board are two resolutions, the first of which is the little technical difficulty. Okay, now I think we're in business. There are two resolutions tonight, one being the resolution for a declaration of intent to purchase the property. That is not only covering the cost of it, it's not working, so if you can just take it, that'd be great. Is the cost of the property, which right now is being discussed at $2.4 million, but also covers the successful agreement with Lasco, the neighbor to the north of this property, for an access agreement. So those are two conditions as part of that declaration of intent. The second item is the reimbursement resolution, which essentially provides for, are we working this?
No.
The second resolution provides for our ability to reimburse ourselves to use bonds or other debt instruments to help us come back to fund all or part of the facility.
That's where we want to be, right?
There we go, sorry. I think we're in business now.
Yeah.
Okay, and tonight there's some things that we're going to cover specifically. We're going to talk about the property itself, the redevelopment plan for that property, the site access improvements that we anticipate to make that facility work, the financing options, a glimpse at some of the operational efficiencies that we think are possible through this consolidation, and then ultimately also talking about the value of properties that the city will be able to declare surplus once we're able to move from two facilities into one for this component of public works operations. just a quick look at where we are now and how we're operating. We have two facilities that house the functions that we're talking about. And we're talking about our water management component that deals with the servicing of our water and sewer lines throughout our service areas, as well as our fleet maintenance operation, which services departments across the city organization, and those, as well as then the streets function. The first two, water management and fleet maintenance, are currently located on what's affectionately called the Hill, which is located at Hillsborough Road near the Hillsborough-Del Rio intersection. That's about a 5.5 acre parcel. The primary building there is about 20,000 square feet and dates back to 1981. There is a second facility there that has a smaller building of about 3,700 square feet. Here's just a couple photos of the exterior of that facility up on the hill. And it's just very limited in terms of space. You'll note the outside storage in the one photo. And the one end also has outside storage with some coverage on it, but you know, we're really squeezing every inch of use out of that facility as we are now. And again, it's a facility that was serving the needs of our community 30 years ago, and that now we're still using. And you know, making the best of it, but it does have some real limitations. These are a couple views inside of the facility. The top left is a photo of part of the fleet maintenance operation, and it's hard to see here, but it's not a real high clearance, so we can't get some of the larger equipment up, and so we can work on it. A good bit of our fleet operation or maintenance services happen outdoors because of the limited space that we have here, and of course that's impacted by weather and is also limited in terms of effectiveness there. You see also just a photo of the small space we've got as a shop area, and then the bottom photo is just our locker room that we have within that facility. The other location is our streets department location, which is on Southeast Parkway. That's a facility that, while it's newer, was constructed in 1998, is pretty limited in size for the size of our operations today. That primary building is about 7,700 square feet. There was an additional storage shed added in 1994, which is to the back, which I think is somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 square feet of just covered storage. And here's the photos of the exterior of the building. You'll note on the bottom photo a lot of equipment outside stored to the back of the facility. Again, one of the limitations of size. Here's the interior. You see a pretty cramped office space with 6 or 7 inspectors working in one small area. We have added a mezzanine to help maximize the space in there, and you see a smaller lift helps us work on some equipment there as well. And you'll note our locker room in the bottom is right adjacent to the truck. So we're pretty cramped there as well, and have done everything we can, I think, to really squeeze every use of space out of that for our operations. And again, that's a more modern facility. It's more up to date in terms of our needs, but it's just small for what we're asked to do on a daily basis. Let me just summarize the basics of the 84 Lumber property. At this point, we have an understanding in terms of an asking price with 84 Lumber that would be $2.4 million. They are seeking at that price to be able to close within a 60-day period. They're in some ways given us an opportunity at a lower cost to be able to close more quickly. We've been having some ongoing discussions throughout the whole calendar year looking at the opportunity for that facility, and have gotten down to this cost at this point. It's a 15.8 acre site. About half of it is developed at this point, so it has lots of room for expansion. On the property itself, 2 enclosed buildings, each around 20,000 square feet, that provide a lot of workspace, and then there are 3 large outside storage sheds, which in total are over 21,000 square feet. Again, it's located off Columbia, and does have good access to both the other public works facility just across the way on Century Court, as well as good access to really be centrally located when you look at the build out of our community. Just as a frame of reference, When you look at the assessor's appraised value, market value estimate, they put the estimate of that property at $3.63 million. We pulled together a comparison of other larger pieces of property, some with buildings, some without, to just try to get a frame of reference. And at $2.4 million, that per acre value is about 65% below the average of those 20 properties that we did a comparative on. It's one measurement, 65% below on a per acre market appraisal per acre. And so that's one measuring stick of many that you can look at, but that was one that we looked at to try to give us a frame of reference of is this truly a good value for us. The next is an aerial photo, a little dated aerial photo, but of the site. And you'll see the front building is what we call Building A, and that has a portion of it, the portion I'm pointing to right here, which is more the retail and office space for 84 Lumber's operation. And then to the other portion of that building, a little over half of it is open storage and areas where we could put vehicles and where we envision water management and the service area operating. And then this area is what's called Building B, and that would house our fleet maintenance operations there. Again, they're each about 20,000 square feet in total. They're only about 8 years old, so they've got a lot of useful life within each of the buildings. And then you'll see the 3 storage sheds that are out there that are very good size. We'd be able to put our large equipment under those and keep them under cover. And then this whole area where a lot of the lumber and other things were laid out when 84 was operating there is all open space now, paved open space. Just a site of the exterior entrance gate. It's already has a nice gated area. This parking area out here, a lot of parking spaces would be good for our employee parking as well as for visitors. And then this is one of the interior pictures. Hard, again, to get the scope of it, but much higher ceiling clearance would allow us to work on vehicles, allow us to have much greater storage areas to work in. In fact, the administrative area, we're looking, one of the big components of that is to put a mezzanine area up there so that we could have additional office and meeting space down the line for our, once we have all of the components in that facility. Our development plan is in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to move the Hill operations, so the water maintenance and water management areas and the fleet maintenance areas into this consolidated facility. We would look to do that as quickly as we could. Our estimates at this point is that could happen within a year to year and a half from the time that we were in possession of the facility and ready to go, have your go-ahead to do it. And this is when all the heavy construction really happens. Whether it's used immediately in phase 1 or not, it just makes sense to do it while you're adapting the facility to this use. It includes build-out of locker rooms, of providing the accessibility through an elevator in Building A, the second floor, which would house offices, meeting areas, and then installation of storage and inventory control areas in both Building A and Building B. Again, Building B would be where the fleet maintenance operation would be located, and you see the various components involved in that in terms of accommodating the service of our many vehicles, especially now opening up the opportunity for us to truly serve our larger vehicles within our fleet. Phase 2 would really be much smaller. It would incorporate just the build-out of office and meeting space, especially for when the streets department in full moves into the facility. In combination, the phase 1, phase 2 design and construction is estimated, along with the moving transition costs, to be just under $2.5 million. We think that's a pretty conservative estimate, and we've tried to incorporate what we think are going to be needed to house and accommodate these services for a good long period of time. We're one of the really appealing factors in the facility and the site is that it's got expandable capabilities, but it's also going to serve our needs immediately for a good long period of time as well. And so those are some of the primary benefits that we see, and we'd be able to get in there pretty quickly and make use of it. Site access is a key issue. This facility doesn't work if we can't get to Columbia efficiently, effectively, get to a signalized intersection and make it work. To really make that work, you've got to look at the working with Lasco, the neighbor to the north, to get access to Columbia. The existing Beasley, Lumber Drive, Columbia intersection, which would be the most direct route, is just not going to be practical for signalization. It's too close to the existing signal that's just a block or so away at Century Court. So that's just not a practical option. So we've been engaged in conversations with Lasco to look at how that would work. And I'd like Vernon to kind of take you through that. We've had some very good discussions with them as recently as this morning, and it seems like we're moving in a real good direction in terms of being on the same page to make that happen. We've got a couple different alignments to look at. I'll let Vernon take you through the components of that.
That, when we originally started dialogue with Lasco, which they've been extremely cooperative, we looked at a couple of different options, one coming off the back of the property, which went around the building, but one that came across the soccer field at a point that would not be disruptive to the programming that exists there today. And because Lasco does allow the YMCA to use those fields. And we had thought, and Eric, if I could borrow the pointer, that would be helpful. Thank you. This is the back end of the office building that Eric had showed you previously. The existing office building for A4 Lumber was on that part. And these are the two storage sheds here. With the proposal is to build an access road that would be gated and have liner fencing from the soccer field here. And we had originally thought to have a drive that came this way to where the signal would be. It is Lasco's intention to close this access here and widen this access so their delivery trucks and supplying trucks can drive this way into their facility and access their plant and warehouse over here. They've recently received a variance from our Stormwater Appeals Board to locate this at this location. It was encroaching a little bit into the stream buffer. After discussing further with representatives from Lasco, we came to an agreement that we are hoping to move forward on is have the same access, but to turn left on this existing road and then make a right turn to a point here and then exit out. And so thereby this would be the city's cross-access easement that they've agreed to work with us on. Now, there's many factors that go into that, and some of these are reflective in the cost estimates we put together. Our initial plan would be obviously to construct this through the grassy area and this portion in through here. In concept, Lasco is very agreeable to grant us that cross-access easement. And with that comes, in compensation for the easement itself, would be paying for their half of the street light that they had agreed to pay, and that we would also share in the maintenance of this part of the easement as well. That'll be reflected in a future agreement.
So what are they planning on doing with that building point up to the top? That one. They've got they've got stuff in there now.
Right.
Yeah, retail. So what are they going? Because you're not effectively blocking them off, but you're making it more difficult for someone to get in over the truck traffic that's gonna be coming in and out for the city. You got a coffee, I think it's a coffee shop in there, and it's a kiddies,
Sodium and, yeah.
blow-up balloon type thing.
Oh, the jumping jack.
Yeah, the jumping thing.
Well, actually, in our discussion, it is a multi-tenant building presently.
Uh-huh.
If their company expands, they had indicated potential for additional warehousing space for them, but they're not in that position yet.
And
But
it
they
was-
did
it was
mention
built
that
for that.
having the signal here actually provides much better access both in and out to everybody that uses it. A lot of the people that, and we even talked about that this morning, that the visitors and the parents, families that utilize the soccer field utilize both of these entrances that currently exist to get in and out of that site. But as we've all experienced, the difficulty is making a left-hand movement onto Columbia, which now the signal provides much better access.
Where are the soccer parents parking?
All in the,
All over.
Along the
Oh,
road.
Along the road
in
and in the
that
parking lot.
parking lot right there.
But
Yeah,
remember.
with this
but
configuration,
remember-
we're going to be right against the soccer fields. So
Yeah.
the
But,
the kids will have to, sometimes they practice in the afternoons.
yeah, but
Most of the
remember-
time it's on the weekends, but.
Yeah. Most of the time, our traffic won't be there when the kids are there.
That is
Because they
correct.
practice, but you're right, Mike, they do practice sometimes, but it's usually after school. It's usually 4 o'clock on, and we're wrapping stuff up around 4,
Yeah, we shouldn't have
4:30,
as
aren't we,
much
at the streets?
conflict.
Aren't they mostly in by 4?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty
They
much.
start early and they.
Yeah, they're early.
End early.
And then Saturdays and Sundays, we wouldn't have our traffic going there. So that would be helpful.
It would be limited. We would
Yeah,
have the
it wouldn't
occasional
be- Mm-hmm.
crew need to go out for whatever issue, but we wouldn't have,
Truck after truck.
and what we have
yeah.
is crews go out in the morning and they're out, better part of the morning, they might come back at lunch, and then they're back out and coming back in the end of the day. So it sort of comes in different waves.
Yep.
But there's potential for some conflict, but I think fairly limited with
Yeah,
that use.
Sharing in the maintenance of the road, I heard Lasco.
And the building in the back, very back.
Would they share in this?
Lasco owns all
Oh,
of that.
Lasco owns that.
They
the
rent
soccer
some
field.
of it out, but they own all of that. property.
Lasco owns the soccer fields.
Yeah, they own that as
They own
well.
the circle. Plus, who, did I miss this? Who's going to be paying to construct the road?
We will.
We would be.
That's our,
They're not
these
gonna-
improvements.
They're constructing the intersection
They're
improvements.
Right.
constructing this intersection here.
Right. But the road itself would be,
This
Our
would be ours. Immediately in phase one, we would do this portion
sure.
and this portion through the grass here. And then come back at a different time because there is an existing paved road there right now. And we can look at making sure that's in good condition going forward. Lasco,
That's actually part of our design and geotechnical review in this project, is to look at these areas and how viable they are long-term to take the truck traffic that's going to come through.
How wide is that road there, the vertical road right there?
The road that we're building.
Do we know? Could you get two
this
trucks
one here,
side by side?
I don't know.
Could you get two trucks side by side on that right now? I don't really recall.
Well, the way it's laid out here, it's very close. But that'll be.
But you'd have to have 2 lanes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's got to be 2 lanes.
So if you widen that, where would you go? Couldn't go in the soccer field, to go the other direction.
We would obtain a sufficient easement to do what we need to do in it. Again, this is an agreeable route in principle, and it's incumbent upon us to reduce that to an agreement that defines the space that we are going to actually have indefinite access to.
Tell us one more time why you didn't want to just bring that road right down to Columbia, just straight and not cut across. Why was that? They didn't
Because,
want to do it.
well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, Lasco, is part of their business operation, wants to have a wider access here so they can take their trucks back and across, and then access this warehouse and their manufacturing operation over there. For them to come in this way and do some other type of movement would be more costly. Secondly, there's, as far as I'm aware, not anything across, and in our agreement with a recent approval of a plat for Longview, these two entrances line up.
Okay.
And that would serve this area that is to be developed at some point as well.
So you're benefiting the city operations, you're benefiting Lasco, you're benefiting the future development at Longview.
Since this is a plan that we just saw, I mean, just this moment, what about any changes to the proposed expense for the road?
Cost. We have added, we still need to continue to look at that. We did add another 100,000 or so just in going through this.
So
the
instead
original
of-
road cost had been about 200,000. We added another 100,000 to that estimate, but we'll need to refresh that. This is something that's under development with Lasco as we look at it.
So the number, though, that we got then would
Included that,
include the-
yes, it did.
The 300,000.
It had 300,000 for construction, but if you look at the documents behind that, it had 200,000 for the actual road construction. And that was with that first alignment. So we had to make an educated guess, but that's something we're still adjusting on. I would also say we've got a pretty high number in for that signalization at over 325,000 for the installation, which is, we think, pretty high. You look at the other estimate that's in that package, it's closer to 200,000. But we're trying to use the high number wherever we go when we've got estimates.
Could I say, you just brought up something right there, you're saying, okay, this was on, you know, the main page, but then you say, if you look at the other numbers back in the other part of it, you know, I have a great concern that we first saw these numbers, 25 hours ago? And even though I'm not necessarily interested in prolonging this discussion, I think it's completely unfair to ask us to make a decision tonight about this. Honestly, you know, I did well, and I'm not working anymore. I did well to look through this, and those last attachments, I just kind of thumbed through. But I certainly didn't have the opportunity to go back and look at besides just the main thing, to go back and look at those pages and pages of numbers and pick out that there was 200,000 where on the other was 300,000. So as I say, I'm not interested in necessarily prolonging this for a long time, but I think, and as I say, there are many parts of it that I have said from the first time we looked at it that was of great interest to me, but I truly think that it's unfair for us to ask us to make a decision about it tonight.
And we can absolutely talk about how comfortable the board is at what stage and how far we go with this. And again, as I said at the beginning, we apologize that it came to you late. You got it within an hour or two of us having the whole picture.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to trickle it out. I wanted to give you everything. So that was the judgment I made, but I apologize that created a crunch for you. And
I know you
we
said-
try to avoid that, but it
I'm going to
happened.
tell you, if I'd spent the whole 25 hours on it without, you know, I still don't think I could have, you know, gotten into, you know, how you were saying, oh, there's a number back here.
Yeah.
There was no way.
And that's one of the things we tried to say in the memo is that we pulled numbers from, we had in a couple places multiple estimates. We had both a staff estimate and we were able to get some estimates from Reagan Smith looking at this. And where there were conflicts in numbers, we picked the high number. And so that's sort of reflective on that. And on this alignment, again, this sort of just came up in the last day or so. We added another 100,000 to try to approximate it, but that's a little rough, and we're working with the best information we have at this point.
Let's keep going, because we've got a lot of things
Question.
to listen to.
Yeah.
Good.
Did you,
I've got one, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
so we have a solid number from Lasco on what the easements are going to cost?
Well, the easements, we have an understanding that our payment for the signal will cover the cost of the easement.
And
There won't be an out-of-pocket for the easement itself. The out-of-pocket will be around installing the signal and putting in the roadway.
And our portion of the signal is half?
Well, we're putting in the entire signal at this point, which is 325,000 was our estimate for installation. There is an understanding with Longview that they would contribute and Lasco would contribute. Well, we're covering the Lasco portion, if you will. There's 115,000 recapture of costs that we have incorporated in that project, which reflects where the current agreement is. But that plat does expire.
Right.
But we've had some discussions with them about where that is.
For
Not the
Longview.
plat expired.
I'm
Well-
sorry, that,
Well, it is. In August of last year,
Oh, they
we
didn't,
approved, recorded.
Thank you.
Correct.
yeah, it didn't get recorded.
We approved a plat for Longview that shows this intersection here. And attached to that were several sureties, one of which was for the half of the signal. They have not recorded it yet, thus not paid the sureties, so they would have to come back in to have that plat reapproved so they can go forward with recording it at such time they have interest in the parcel again, or
So
parcel.
that recovery would be good regardless of whoever made the improvement on that Longview property.
Yeah, we've still got to go through how that might get recaptured. The big point here is getting the agreement with LASCO to get the access, get to that site and get the signal in place. We have a pathway to get some reimbursement from the owner to the west that we'll continue to pursue. But, that we didn't put that as a condition for the acquisition because we felt the most important thing was to get the direct access through LASCO tied up and the acquisition of 84 Lumber, obviously.
Have we counted, I guess, at build-out, total number of employees and cars and trips?
For the city right now, those functions incorporate 110 employees across those 3 business units. And they operate now in a total of about, if you look at building square footage, about 27,000 square feet of true building area that we have them working in. This has about 40,000 of building area and 21,000 of storage sheds. So,
Would we still use the current entrance and exit for 84 Lumber too, if it comes?
yeah, I would expect that we would, and our employee parking and guest parking would probably stay around where the retail parking was for 84.
This be for our trucks?
And then our equipment and everything else is to the back of Building A and along Building B, beyond what was the retail building.
The other businesses, there are other businesses located on Lumber Drive
Yeah.
that utilize
Sure.
that entrance, so.
Would they be able to utilize that road?
Oh, yes, yeah, because the 84 Lumber site isn't until it's back towards the property.
'Cause there's
Not that road.
Not this road, no.
Not the new road, no.
Not that one.
Actually, and that's a good point that was very specific in talking with the LASCO representatives, that in the event the city ever vacates this site, sells it, that this easement does go away. Because
What
they
easement?
don't,
What easement?
The access
the
easement.
access easement
They're
here.
interested in providing it to us, but
They're
not
interested in
necessarily
providing it to
us.
us, but not a
Well,
future.
that could be a problem.
Not for us.
Not for us.
No, but if we wanted to sell it, that could be a problem. Then you would sell it to somebody who doesn't have a way to get in and out. I mean. with-
You just
with a
have to,
light.
you just have to approach that again at that time.
Yeah,
They
but
just don't want
hopefully we
to,
wouldn't
they
be-
don't want to
I mean,
give
if we're
that
gonna buy
forever.
this, we're gonna be there for a long
And they
time.
still
Yeah, this
have
is a
Lumber
long-term.
Drive,
So I'm not
I mean,
gonna worry
is-
about
is
that. I
I
mean,
want to
that's-
say, I really appreciate all the work you all have
That
done,
doesn't make
because this is a big project, and you all have worked hard on it, and I think it is very, very needed by the city. And I feel very comfortable with what you've done.
Alderman Barnhill.
I just want to make sure that I understand. We've got 40,000 feet on the new location. You got 20,000 feet on the hill. You got 7,000 something feet over on whatever.
Southeast.
Southeast Parkway. The hill goes into one 20,000 square foot building, and the Southeastern Parkway goes into the other 20,000. That's tight on one of them, so that's really not expansion. The other one is this.
Yeah.
Make sure that you got, because you got 4 90-degree angles. If you're coming off
That's a
Columbia
good
Highway,
point.
you got 4 90s to get into the back of that or to
Yeah.
come out of it. It has to be wide enough for a pretty good sized truck to get in and out, and we've we've got tractor trailer trucks there.
And that was part of our discussion with LASCO this morning about providing, it may not be quite as sharp as the 90 degrees
Okay.
you see
Yeah.
here. We talked, especially in this
And that-
area.
You come to that one right
yeah.
there.
That
And they were very willing to look at that. The other qualification that came out of that discussion is they want to line up with this. See that road there? They want to line up with
Yeah.
that existing road there. They're going to take this entrance away, like Vernon said, but they're going to keep this, and they want to connect that across. So we would slide a little closer
Yeah.
to Columbia. Maybe 25, 30 feet, I think is our
I think it was
estimate.
about 25 is what we
Not a
looked
big
at.
change, but that was the nature of our discussion, is they wanted to move closer to Columbia. We wanted to smooth out this turn a little bit, give it a little more room, not make it such a 90-degree.
Yeah.
And they're
good point.
amenable looking at that. So we'll adjust that, and we'll look at the width on this existing road to make sure that that meets our needs.
And the only other thing I'd say is I think you gotta put a number out that's the total cost. 2.4 for the property and 300,000 for the road and 325,000 for the signal and, you know.
Yeah, see, that's the
I
thing, that's the
wanna-
thing about it.
Yeah.
That's another
Add
thing.
it all up.
Yeah, the 2.4 million, I had heard that number or somewhere around there, but I had not heard the 5.6 or whatever it is that shows on here. And to me, that's a big difference.
Well, to zoom out to maybe 30,000 feet, here's the way I look at it. The threshold question is, do we need to get at least a remedy for the problems that we have on the Hill? I don't think anyone would argue that we don't. The next question is, does it make sense to consolidate the various functions that are kind of scattered around the city that all have a lot in common in terms of trucks and storage and supervision and all that kind of stuff? I think that makes sense. The next question is there a superior option than this? And I don't know that there really is. There is almost certainly no place that is so readily convertible to our use. If we were to begin with a green field, our costs would be significantly higher, I would think. We are repurposing a building that if you had built it for us would probably look a lot like what it is. Maybe not exactly, but it'll do. So, are we getting, then I get to the, are we getting a good deal? Does the easement make sense? Does the location of the light make sense? And I'm satisfied that we are starting with a need and then making prudent decisions in the decision tree after we start with the recognition of a fairly urgent need to do something about the work environment for our employees on the Hill. So I'm comfortable with moving forward if if the easement doesn't come through just the way we want. I would want to write the contract as contingent upon satisfactory, recording a satisfactory easement. I'm not thrilled that LASCO wants our easement to expire if we vacate. I understand their interest, but looking at the potential, the ability to, as we do this, I assume that we will declare surplus and then liquidate the properties that we are vacating. Eventually, a future board may face the same decision with this property. Granted, that's probably some time off, but when they moved onto the Hill, that's what they said. When we bought the property on Southeast, that's what we said. This will work for a long time, but here we are, prepared now to abandon it. Would we pay what we're about to pay without the easement? No. That undermines our ability on the back end of this deal. So I'm not convinced that we need to give that one up. If they want to sell this property and LASCO wants us to make all these improvements and give them that light, then I'm not sure that this easement needs to be disposable. It, I do intend that we would be there for a while, but that's a negotiating point that I'm not prepared to concede just yet.
And we can definitely revisit that. That point literally came up this morning. That's the first time we had heard that
You
from
prob-
them. So-
probably need to go look at that one again. And what Dana said, I mean, what if Lasco sells?
Right,
Well, it can't be contingent upon Lasco.
That's right.
no,
Period. It
has to be,
that's a deal breaker.
yeah.
As long as we're there, it
So-
has to be there
Yeah.
from our,
Exactly.
operationally.
I think you need to go back to,
If I
You
may,
go.
just one ancillary comment to Alderman McClendon. You know, it is intended that there's existing space there on half of the developed 15 acres, and that we could certainly build and expand as this community grows. When this community grows larger, and out, as one would maybe say, outsizes that particular site, many communities in that range have multiple sites because their community is so large that having one central location's not adequate to service their community efficiently. And what I'm just saying is, at such point in time that the city would grow that large, there'd probably be need for a satellite location.
Well-
Similar to what we've really did in some form out by Liberty Park to house some of our landscaping equipment, so we're not moving it back and forth.
Well, I understand that. I just hope that this board has realized that no decision that we make is permanent, and we ought not make them with any confidence that they even should be. We have already had to backtrack on restrictive covenants that we've imposed upon ourselves. So we just need to realize that we are only temporary stewards of all of these decisions. Subsequent bodies may be confronted with different circumstances than we can foresee.
My question is centered around the expandable space. You alluded to it a few minutes ago. What of the 15.81 acres, half of that has buildings?
About half of it is used right now.
Show it to me.
Let me take it back.
Where is the space for expansion or
There we go.
and that would be roughly
So
See,
you have
about
a-
60.
Isn't that great?
It's at the bottom.
you've got
So it's
this
not-
area
it's
already
already-
that's paved and enclosed, but not built upon. It's really an open area, and then you've got all of this area
So
that's
the
part of the
green grass
parcel.
Yes.
Yeah, it goes
Did you go on that trip?
And that butts
Well
up
back
to
there.
what? So
Railroad track
all the way back to the
Yeah,
railroad track.
there's nothing back there.
in my house.
That's right.
yeah,
Oh, well, that's
Mike
okay.
Skinner's.
there's,
Backs up to your house?
Yes.
Well, there's our easement.
This is the future side of Skinner Drive right here.
With access for all the trucks.
That's it rains
Run
around.
right out.
Talk to, talk to, yeah.
Oh, no, we're not paying for that.
Are you,
No, Eric,
go back to that, one
Do you
more
want
time.
to go back up?
Go back to that.
and that was part of my thoughts, is that we have that expansion capacity there. Go ahead.
One more time. Point where the road is going
Right through here.
through those buildings there.
Right,
Okay.
that aisle will line up with our access road. Go to here, go across there.
Well, we're gonna have to be careful building in between there for a truck to come through.
Well, the building's already there.
This is where the access.
Truck's
Now,
just
now,
gonna have
let
to be
me ask you,
careful.
where did their traffic come into? It didn't come down from Columbia.
Columbia.
Did it all come in the
Yeah.
front?
Mayor,
Oh, okay.
I have a question. From 30,000 feet to road level, have we taken any of our big equipment operators out there and said, if you had to do it every day,
Turn.
would
Can you
would
make
making,
these?
would driving out between, because as I recall it, when we went, it's not a large space between
Right,
the
that's what
office
that's the reason
building
I was asking.
and those sheds.
Well, Joe was
And the
out
sheds
there.
are not necessarily beyond, being modified, shortened, or whatever, but I really
this
think.
drive aisle here.
Joe,
Yeah,
Joe
I
went
really,
with us that
I mean,
day.
well,
We've looked at it a number of times, but
You were there.
we'll ask again.
I just think we ought to take some of our guys
Yeah.
out there and ask them.
Well, Joe was there. Joe was there that day,
I-
remember?
No, but it's not the
It's
same.
different.
It's not the same
The
thing.
question I
I hear you.
asked was, has anybody taken our heavy equipment?
guys who
operators
drive it
out?
every
The
day.
actual
That's right.
guys who
That's right.
actually have
Or
to
just
climb
drove
up
a
in the
truck
cab.
back there.
Or our
And
biggest
done it.
ladder truck, or, yeah.
That is deceiving, that is quite
And what if a
wide.
big
It's
ladder
pretty
truck-
big, but
It
it
is.
looks narrow, more narrow here, but we'll do it. We'll even take a piece of equipment and run it through.
yeah.
This is
Also-
tricky.
And also for the big ladder truck to come down to the end and backside of the property. Because once we start expansion, will there be an access, I mean, a road to go through the
Yeah,
center?
you'd have to provide for sort of an internal network to work to
Right.
whatever facilities are in place there.
Okay. Okay, the details.
Two questions. Have we considered what the cost of outright buying the easements versus what we're going to invest in the lights?
Yeah, we looked at that.
We
It's
did.
around $200,000.
Versus
Half
300,000?
It's pretty equal.
Comparable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, we've seen a design for this phase of Columbia, and it's either 4 with broken
Oh, the
median,
winding.
or 5, depending on which part you're in. Will we have to go back and
Tear up.
redo?
That was part of our discussion today.
Will
with
we have to
Lasco.
redo the signal configuration?
Well, yeah, that would be
Yes.
part of TDOT's project.
I was going to say,
and
let's
that was
get that,
part
let's
of-
get that,
Okay.
let's get that funded first before.
Yeah, that was part of our discussion a little bit. That would be part of the TDOT project. They would need to deal with all the signals all along
Yeah.
Columbia. And this was part of the discussion with Lasco, is they originally wanted to be closer to the road, and we were concerned about when Columbia gets widened
Yeah.
and having enough room to really stack and get into the intersection and the turn lanes here. So that's how we kind of came to this as a good compromise of aligning with this roadway, getting us enough distance to stack this way and get into the turn lanes. But it's a good point.
So what's the big question? The traffic study with additional traffic on Columbia once we get that operational?
Well, it's all going to be a lot of that traffic's already there. With their operations not nearby, not too far by from that location.
Employees will have to
You're
plan
bringing the
to
fleet.
arrive earlier and leave later.
Yeah, you are bringing the fleet traffic through that goes to the hill now, and
Which
what
is
happens from
different.
water. So you're really adding that
Yeah.
more to the mix. Some of this traffic's already there.
Yeah,
So
That
it
that
will add
traffic,
some to it, though.
it's right there is where everything slows down,
sure does.
between that and the next slide.
Let me take you through there's just a few more
Okay,
slides.
go ahead.
This is just the summary of costs on access. We did net out the cost recovery here, and that's the existing number. And again, this has the design that is not only for this, but for any future improvements to enhance the roadway. And it's about $600,000 net of that cost recovery. The other element that was mentioned in our discussion already is we're going from 2 pieces of property into 1. So we would ultimately have 2 properties that we would envision becoming surplus and then be subject to our disposition of them and essentially sale, if the process is through sealed bid. And of course, the board always has a decision or a choice to decide whether to accept that bid or not. But we did ask an appraiser to give us an estimate range of value on the 2 properties, given their location and what the existing use is and what the potential use could be. We got these 2 ranges in here, which I would say honestly were a little higher than we expected, but this is what we got.
I'd say so.
$1.5 million to $1.8 million for the hill, and $1 million to $1.3 million for Southeast Parkway.
Some of you.
So those are the numbers we have that we're working from at this point.
Must be that.
Even if those are in half, that gets us around to the budget we've been planning on this project at the beginning or when we submitted
Those numbers
capital
make,
investment.
those numbers make buying 84 miles free.
That's right. It looks good, doesn't it?
We didn't give any targets, we just said, look at these
Yeah,
properties and
right.
tell us. We were, we're hands off on that one.
Must be the hillside view.
We have done,
Yeah, the floodplain.
yeah, we have done a preliminary look at
Definitely.
financing and how this might work. I'll let Russ comment a little bit about that, but we've done a quick evaluation about what we think might be the most effective way to do this, and I'll let Russ comment quickly.
Well, I think one of the, of course, now's an awfully good time to finance anything because the rates are so low, but you still have to pay back the principal. So early estimates, I would recommend something in a 10 or 12-year term for this, which means we would be adding $500,000 in financing to, if we spread this out through a bond issue or capital outlay notes or whatever. So that's something that you would have to look at. What that means in practice is if you divide that up among the various departments that are going to be there, it's going to add, something less than $100,000 to each of 6 budgets as we go through in the different departments that are there. And it's really too early to give you any specifics about the financing, but those are kind of the general parameters. And there's a memo in there that talks about that. And went ahead and had PFM run a 6-year capital outlay note estimate if you want to look at those details. But I think making the decision to go forward and putting that in place is what you're really here for. And the financing will be the tail of the dog.
The reimbursement resolution that you have just provides the capability to go down any one of a number of paths in terms of how you allocate it between debt or cash or how you might do this. So it just is a broad authority and gives us the ability to go back and apply it to a debt issuance. And there might be some ways that we look at in conjunction with other projects we know that might be an efficient way to issue the debt as well. Because $5 million is a relatively small debt issuance, but one that we could look at structuring it with our existing debt as well.
And the reimbursement resolution is a requirement by the IRS so that any bonds that we might issue would be tax exempt. That's the real purpose in passing that resolution before you do a transaction.
That brings me to another one of my concerns, well, actually 2 of them. One of them is if we're going to be thinking about this in the big picture, we need to look at it in the context of other projects in our CIP. This was not one of the top projects, although I think many of us thought that it certainly was worthy there. But I think we must look at it in terms of other things that we're planning to do. Secondly, the method of funding is different from anything that we have done and the city has done in I don't know how long. I don't know that we necessarily have done bond anticipation notes for many, many, many years. I think we've just been getting money out of our reserve. But the fact is, if you look at that part that talks about the funding, there's several different options there, but a couple of them are really different from anything that I know that we have done in many years, and I think that needs to be looked at. Not to say that I would disagree necessarily. However, it is not what we've been doing. So the fact that we really need to look at this in the context of the other projects, we have some others that a lot of people have had support for, and I want us to think if we're doing this, then to me that means that we should not do other multi-million-dollar projects that we're talking about. And as I say, the total price, those 3 things are my main concerns, besides the fact that I didn't have a chance to read it all.
Got one question, Russ. What's our reserve fund at right now? What's the percentage of balance that we have in there?
Well, it's roughly $25 million, and we have a $51 million budget. If I may clarify, if I was unclear in my memo, I would anticipate using reserves to make the initial purchase of this, and then roll it into a bond issue later on. The choice of bond issue would either be to do a traditional bond issue or use capital outlay notes. The last time we used capital outlay notes, I think, was in the year 2000 or 2001. It was before I came here, but they were very popular
I've heard of them, absolutely.
before rates on bonds got so low, very frankly. But the capital outlay notes pretty much works the short end of the yield curve, much as variable rate debt did. So that kind of pushed capital outlay notes out of the way for a while. But it's a very traditional way, and it has statutes in the Tennessee Code.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very familiar with them because I can remember the county doing many things using bond anticipation notes. However, one of the possibilities was, though, just to do this for 3 years and kind of, I mean, I don't want to call it like a balloon, you know, but still, that was one of the other options, and that is not something that I'm aware that has been done.
Well, that's actually the definition of a capital outlay note. It's a 3-year note that's renewable for up to 3 times. And effectively, you amortize the debt over 9 years or 12 years. But you have to reset the rate at the end of the 3rd year.
You could do it 9 times? 8 times?
Well, you would do it for 8. You would do it for a total of 9 or 12 years. But you would lock in rates for the first 3 years, and then you would have to renew the note.
Each 3 years.
Okay.
You would have to go back.
But a lot of that's why I was trying to leave the financing more or less on the back burner, because we don't know how quickly we could sell the property. We don't know what the proceeds would be. I would assume you would want to reduce the debt by whatever proceeds we would have from the other properties. So it gives, the capital outlay notes would give you a little more flexibility.
But as I say, it is definitely different from your saying 10 years at least since that has been done.
And there are all variety of options that we can look at. This is one, as we looked at it, that seemed to fit well. Spread it, but not go too far out in terms of the time that you'd be paying off the debt. Let me just go through I won't go into this a whole lot, but we've done some initial review of some operational efficiencies, had water and streets put their heads together and say, well, how would they work differently if they were in the same location? What equipment could they share? What staffing would be able to be kind of shared across the departments? And they gave us some rough examples of it, but talked about reducing the need for equipment in terms of backhoe, dump truck, because they can use it across different operations. And this gives you just some rough estimates of what kind of savings we think we would realize just from those components. Fleet maintenance has been able to do a lot with very limited space and capability. We gave you an example of the savings in fire from just doing some very basic maintenance. We have a mechanic certified to work on the various fire equipment that could do more if they had more ability to get in and do that work more regularly, and this facility would help us do it. So we've realized some savings from that expertise and the talent we have on staff, but putting our fleet operation in the right kind of facility where you can get large equipment up and you can work on it really could open up some other possibilities for savings and efficiency in terms of downtime of staff and our work crews. Here's just a summary of the project overall. $2.4 million essentially for acquisition, another $2.5 approximately for the development of the site, including the transition and move, and then the access costs around $600,000. So that collectively is about a $5.5 million project. Then the opportunity to sell the 2 existing properties in that range. $2 to $3 million is what we've gotten at this point from our appraiser in examining that, which you net that out brings us down to somewhere around a $3 million project. Now, that would be over time. That would be as you're able to transition from the 2 operations into one site now. I would say I think it's the right thing for us in terms of an efficiency in the near term, but also provides a lot of capability in the long term. And that's what we ought to be thinking about, is how do we make ourselves more efficient in a better workspace now, but then also be in a position to serve the needs of a growing community into the future. So That's where we are and why we brought it forward with a recommendation to proceed with the project. I recognize that we're moving fast on this because the opportunity came available. We've been looking at properties since I got here, I can tell you, in terms of what these options look like. And a lot of those properties on that list of 20 properties we've looked at just to try to understand what could work for us. And this really matches well in terms of its adaptability and its ability to expand into the future as well. You know, I would ask at a minimum tonight I get a sense from you that gives me something I can go to 84 Lumber and start moving positively forward if you want to do this. We've got the two resolution, the resolution that declares intent, which really provides authority within the purchase price, conditioned upon getting the access agreement. We can adopt that and move forward, and that's the authority you grant us. I would be glad to bring back specific elements of that to you for review and approval if you'd like along the way. But I guess, you know, if we can get some direction tonight, whether it's the formal adoption of those two resolutions or at least a directive to us to move forward and set this up, I can at least start working with 84 to put the pieces in place and start working towards that, what that closing date might look like. Again, it's around 60 days is what they have requested at this point. I'm sure, again, like anything, that's negotiable. But I'd like to try to be somewhat responsive to that and see what we can get done.
Well, let me ask you then, would just kind of a consensus and perhaps have this back on the work session and on the regular agenda 2 weeks from now, what would that would do to the time frame?
Well, we unfortunately we have an extra Tuesday, so it's 3 weeks from now that we would meet. That's a little bit, adds a little more time to it. What we could do is we could do the resolution and you could direct me to bring back elements of it. We could go ahead and set closing dates and get the elements put back together and bring you an update, and if you want to give any other direction, you can. Yeah, I'm trying to work within that 60-day time frame and give some sense of the board's interest. Because that's where I left it with them, is I'd talked to board members individually about the opportunity overall, but we hadn't put the package completely together and brought it to the whole board.
Right.
So we needed to have this discussion before I could give them even a sense of how strong the interest was to proceed with it. So I at least need that. If you give us the resolutions, you give approval of the resolutions, then we can really start to move forward with the concrete steps. That doesn't mean I can't bring them back to you too to check in along the way, being the access agreement specifically or some of the other components that you're interested in.
Well, let me ask you though, what would the directive be? This is not something that has to go through 2 readings or anything. So in other words, if we gave the directive tonight, that would mean that we're committed?
You would have
That's what
directed
I'm
me
thinking.
within, you would have given the authority to myself and the mayor to move forward in those parameters. Acquisition at 2.4 million and the access contingent upon getting a purchase agreement at that price and a access agreement with LASCO, as we've described it tonight, at a cost, I think, not to exceed $650,000. So that's the general parameters.
That's a big chunk, in my opinion, to do. As I say, when we heard the 2.4, I never heard the 5.5 until what, yesterday, about this time. And the other thing is, as I stated, I think we must look at this in the context of the rest of the CIP that we're looking at, because I know there are some other projects that some other people feel very strongly about. I personally think this probably has higher priority to me than some of the other projects. But I'm concerned about saying, okay, we'll just go on this, and then all the other things that that have already had a lot of support.
Is this up for vote?
It is on the voting
It is.
agenda, and we'll follow however you want to give direction on this tonight. There's no question you're committing a portion of your capacity to this project in
That's right.
CIP. You're doing it. Now, we think there are some efficiencies operationally that help augment some of that or benefit us somewhat on that, but it's there, and it is capacity that you're committing. It's a little bit out of order. We'd all like to do all the CIP together, but this opportunity came available, and I felt it was important to bring it to your attention and give us a chance to look at it and evaluate where we go.
I'm intrigued about the possibility of what our existing property is valued at, and therefore it gives me some sense of.
I'm interested in that very much. I just, I find it.
It may be surplus property soon then, if you're interested.
So I'm willing to move on if that's what you want to hear from me. I'm willing to move on with that.
Well, we just have to look at all these things in context, and when these things come available, we've all been out there, we took a good look at it. I think we're comfortable, a lot of us are comfortable with what we see there that would fit our needs. And like Dana said, you look at it from 30,000 feet up, look at there's a need, we're filling this need, and at this market value, I think it's a good move, and that is why we have our reserve funds there for when things like this come up that is critical, and it will help us streamline. It will help us streamline our cost and quit throwing money away in these two facilities that we have to constantly share resources with, or we have to duplicate resources. That aging facility on the hill, we have so many problems there. As you said, we can't even do our own maintenance sometimes on these trucks because we can't get them in. So even though I really want to see Phase 4 McEwen done, and I'm still going to be pushing that every step of the way, I don't think it's wise not to take a step in this direction with this. And I would think that if we sit down with the people in my ward and explain this, I'm sure we'd have the backing of the people, generally have the backing of the people to do something like this, because we answered to everyone in the city. Tax dollars should just be spent wisely, and there's an opportunity to do something about this.
Well, I appreciate your comment about that, because that would be the question that I would ask. Are people saying that this, would we be willing to forego some other things to do this?
Well,
to me, and I don't mean forego forever. I just mean
that's opportunity cost.
That's right. To me, it seems like the best thing we could do with the money right now. But again, I would be very reluctant if we were still talking about another 6 to 10 million additional dollars added to what we have already agreed to support. And that's what we've been talking about. And so that's what I'd like to hear. Are people saying that this is kind of now your top priority? I mean, I just like to hear.
I think that I would have the support.
Yeah.
I know my people well enough, and I think I would have the support.
That's what I just want to hear.
I feel comfortable in saying that.
The situation, I think.
And I'm glad to explain it to them and get their input.
Wait a minute.
What are you going to say?
You would have a hard time convincing anyone
Yes.
that they need to drop $6 million to make it easier to run the water plant, okay? This is one of those circumstances where leaders have to lead, okay? Because it doesn't get us pretty flowers or a theater or anything else that's cool.
Preach.
Or
It's a
economic
smart buy and
development.
hold, that's what it is.
I'm not saying
Translates to
that you
economic
could.
development, though. You always leave
I'm
that
not
part
saying
out,
to
Dana.
convince them. What I'm saying is, are you willing?
Yeah,
Are
we
you
can.
willing?
All right, let's go. We're going to another item now. We're going to item number 6.
I want to
Preach your brother,
reemphasize
preach it.
that I think it's very important. In the future, this property is not going to be worth a fraction of this if we don't have a legal easement and a stoplight to get in and out of.
I agree.
And that's why that's a condition of moving forward on the
I
purchase.
agree.
There's no reason to do it if you can't get
We
those.
we have got to
Oh,
have
we've
that.
got to have it. And I don't want that to go away.
Talk to Jack.
Okay.
Eric, I don't want that
Next,
easement.
come on up.
Some quality time.
I don't want that easement to go away either. I don't think
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear that we can
They tell me they're moving stormwater.
Just going to have to do, because we've got some other things that we've got to say something about. Thank you.
We're going to hand you a copy of the presentation and then one of the maps that's included.
All right, and while y'all are doing that, I want to mention that a few of us have been able to see this presentation already. It's basically in 3 parts, and what I would ask, because we have so many things left on the agenda, that you hold your questions until the end of each section of the presentation, if you would. So go.
All right. Does this work?
Yeah, thanks.
All right. We'll flip through all this. I mean, this is
Take your
part
time.
3.
This is really important.
Right, but this is part 3 of the series that we've talked about. This is Jason and Freddie, part 3, back for the 3rd scary movie. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about wastewater. I just want to, real quick, sort of the agenda, as Dr. Moore mentioned, it's sort of in 3 parts. We want to talk a little bit about demand and capacity of the existing wastewater system, similar to what we did on the water side last time. A little bit about the collection system, some potential improvements there, and how that has a big picture in the overall treatment plant capacity situation. Talk a little bit about regulatory requirements again, and then touch on both the existing wastewater treatment plant, which we have a little bit in the past, and want to build on what we've talked about previously, and also on the potential new wastewater treatment plant. And then finally, we do bring some cool stuff. We'll talk a little bit about biosolids. So y'all can pass these around and we can talk a little bit about it. So first we're going to talk a little bit about wastewater demand and capacity. The key here that we wanted to mention, last month we talked a lot about, last time we talked a lot about water and how you are very bounded in your system. Wastewater are a lot different. Although there are some jurisdictional pieces associated with that, in general, your ability to expand your wastewater capacity is much greater than what you have from the water side. Currently, your system is about 20 square miles of area, about 315, 320 miles of gravity sewer, 22 miles of force main, about 26 pump stations. You've seen this slide previously. This goes back once again to the demand that you currently have from the wastewater standpoint. We've talked previously about basically this process as part of the 80% process that's required by TDEC that you need to meet once you sort of get to the point where you're meeting 80% of your permitted capacity, which is currently 12. If you look at the growth numbers, traditionally we went with looking at the cities and the high population for most of the work that we've been doing. As you see, that puts you up in the 22 to 24 range in the next 30 years. So a growth of about double the existing capacity of the system. So the 4 main things that we really looked at as we went through this process is sort of how can you decrease that demand or get a better handle on that demand, maybe lessen it. At the same time, where do you actually increase the capacity that you need to also meet that growth? And there's a couple different things we looked at. Like I said, we want to talk a little bit about the collection system and how you can actually look at reducing the peak flows. That's actually cutting those peaks that you get from rainfall-dependent I&I. We'll talk a little bit about that. It sort of ties back to the map we passed out. We also want to talk about, just like the water plant, running a water or a wastewater system is never a $0 option. There is, it's just like having to put a roof on your house every 15 or 20 years. There's continual maintenance, continual upgrades need to be made, continual looks at things as the processes continue to be more efficient and the regulations change. We also then want to talk about the improvements to the existing wastewater treatment plant, how that could be implemented to increase capacity in concert with potentially adding a new wastewater treatment plant, either at the existing site or at a new site south of town. So in regards to the wastewater collection system, I want to talk a little bit about this graphic real quick. What you see in orange there is your base wastewater flows. That's your actual flow that comes from your customers. That's what people, when they turn on the faucets or they wash clothes or they flush the toilet, that's the flow that gets into the pipes you have in your system. What also happens is that bottom blue line, which is groundwater infiltration. So these pipes are obviously under the ground. At times, if you get cracks, holes, et cetera, that happen in some of these piping systems, especially some of the older ones, you're going to get some groundwater infiltrate. And what ends up happening is that water is also carried to your treatment plant. You end up treating that water. The bigger piece is what happens when you have a large precipitation outside and you get the RDII component of that, which is rainfall-dependent infiltration and inflow. And what happens is that's where you see the peaks. When you design, as we discussed in a second, when you design wastewater treatment plants, you build that peak in because there's certain portions that you can never get out. But the value being from the collection system, the more we can get out before it gets to the treatment plant, the less we have to pay to treat at the treatment plant itself. So we actually did some flow monitoring and put some rain gauges out in the system. Basically, there's 31.
That's the picture.
That's the picture, yes,
Thanks.
ma'am, that you have there. It's also, you copy it in the slide itself, but we wanted to give you a picture so you could see a little bit better. It gets pretty small on the screen. There's basically 31 sewer sheds within the city that we divided out, and we put a rain gauge in each one. Monitor that over the spring, sort of rainier months. What that does, it allows you to get a first line look at what areas of the city are getting more I&I into that portion. We're able to break those into pieces and look at the total flow and then break it down in 31 sections. So what you see in the orange, red, and then in the yellow as well are some of the areas that showed much higher propensity to have a lot of rainfall get into the piping system during rainfall events. We've had some initial discussions with the staff, and they're doing some looking at some continued ways to sort of better look at what the potential and where some potential areas may be for issues with some of those. Basically, this first step is sort of to help pinpoint where the low-hanging fruit may be that you can first address. Looking at one of those areas, just happens to be numbered area 11, and Katie can tell you what the
subdivisions are Cadet, Amber Glen, Liberty Square, and Hill Estate. And the important thing to note here is that on the west side of that area in general, a lot of clay, line pipe, and hammer taps, which means that that's basically where the line is tapped with a hammer. So there's opportunity for cracks and other defects in the collection system.
And there's really no reason we picked the specific area, but we just wanted to show one area that did show a higher level of RDII. And what you can see here is representative costs from either replacement or rehabilitation of both the gravity pipe itself and the manholes within that area to cut down on that infiltration. If you look at an area similar to what you see there and look at the total lining of that system, you're looking at a cost of about $5.6 million. This is something that's being done pretty readily across the nation. We talked a little bit about some of the other cities that are looking at decrees from the federal government, et cetera, that are having to address their collection systems, both from an overflow perspective, but also to limit their treatment capacities. What you'll see in this graphic, this is that same area, with the green line being the gray being the base flow, so that's your base wastewater flow. The green line being the reduced potential in a post-rehabilitation scenario, with the blue line being what was actually seen during the testing. And what you can see, there was a heavy rainfall on February 28th of this year, February 29th, and you see the difference immediately in as far as what was coming out of this area of the system. Just approximately 1/30th of your total system, just this one area there, is about 1 million gallons difference. So during that day, there was 1 million gallon difference pretty much instantaneously that immediately had to be treated at the wastewater plant. If you could have kept that out of your system, then it would have never got there. And you can even see as that tails back off, it takes a couple of days for that to sort of balance back out, where the groundwater, et cetera, goes back down and you're not really seeing that infiltration. So as we talked a little bit, the key here is there cost benefit to doing some, just similar to what we talked about in the distribution system last time, is there cost benefit to doing things in the collection system that may buy you more capacity and lessen the capital expenditure, at least timetable-wise, at the wastewater treatment plant. So that's pretty much for the collection system. Does that, ran through that pretty quickly, but is that, yes?
At some time, I want to ask you about one of these places it's red, and that is not an old sewer there. So what's going on?
Right. Well, in some of that, and we can have a further discussion about it. You know, when you divide it in 31 areas, there is somewhat of an era, you know, that you have to sort, because what we're doing is we're taking the total flow and trying to divide it into those 31 areas based on the rain flow, so it doesn't always, you know, but based on what we're seeing in the flow monitors. You know, sometimes if multiple systems flow through other systems, which often happen with gravity sewer, it can sort of compound itself. So some of those, that's why this is just the first level look at where is sort of the areas that show to be, based on the monitoring in the system, have issues. It could be that there's one, you know, that there's something that's pretty explainable that's found just by doing
Watson Branch sewer is a relatively new sewer.
Right.
And
the other piece is that there's only 31 flow monitors. If you want to pinpoint areas more accurately, you would have to have additional flow monitors. It would have been ideal to have more, but each flow monitor that you add to the study has a cost associated with that. And this was the comfort level of cost that the steering committee felt like was appropriate for this high-level evaluation.
And so now, when do you have your meetings? Because people have said that some of you have already seen this. When do you have your meetings? I thought there was going to be a meeting at the end of the September.
The steering
But
committee?
we'll go ahead.
I'm referring to the steering committee.
Well, I mean, when, those are open to the public, aren't they? Can we find out when those occur?
They're once a month on the first Wednesday of
Okay,
the month
thank
at 2 o'clock. And Ken and Mayor Moore and Eric can forward you those invitations.
Now, that's a different group than the stakeholders. which
I understand that, but yeah, the steering committee is also open to the public though, right?
It's really a staff meeting, but
Well,
it's,
but-
I mean, it's not a public meeting like the stakeholders
Right, I
or this
understand that.
meeting is, but you're welcome
Sure,
to be
thanks.
part of it.
Have we nailed down the stakeholders for the 28th?
We'll talk about that at the
Okay,
end.
good, okay.
And I think in the interest of time, we don't need to spend a lot of time on the regulatory requirements, except for to just remind you all that the loads of, that are allocated to your wastewater treatment plant are set by the waste load allocation into the Harpeth River that are established through the total daily maximum load. And those studies were established some time ago, and that's what the state uses to establish permit limits. You, as a city, have 2 permits. One is the stormwater MS4 permit, and then one for the wastewater treatment plant. And so there's been a lot of discussion about the new wastewater treatment plant being a zero discharge facility. That is not necessarily the case, and that will relate back to how this waste load allocation is distributed among the different sources to the Harpeth River. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at in the river water quality model, which we'll present to you on September 13th at the next work session, and the how that water quality model will be used to look at the distribution of those waste loads through the river system. So we have some information on the permit limits and how the plant's performing, and I think the news here is that the plant is currently performing better than the current permitted limits. But we do anticipate that any improvements to the existing facility and moving into the future, we're going to see continued increase on the stringency of these permits, particularly with regard to nitrogen and phosphorus. So that's kind of the take-home message on the permit requirements. And then the same thing, in the case where you're looking at a potential new wastewater treatment plant, you're going to be held to some very high standards, which would require advanced wastewater treatment at any new facility.
And we talked about, that's also, once again, the water quality, like we talked about last month, there is both some benefits and negatives from a water flow standpoint as well from having that facility. So looking at the existing wastewater treatment plant, we really did three analysis that we went through that were both one, a physical condition assessment, then also both a treatment capacity analysis, which we sort of discussed before, and a hydraulic analysis, which are really 2 different pieces. From a physical standpoint, we went in and we actually had a team, looked at both the physical and mechanical equipment, did an evaluation of that based on structural condition, electrical condition, et cetera, and used sort of the EPA guidelines for criticality and condition to sort of develop that. We also then, like I said, did a biological capacity analysis, both looking at what the actual treatability capacity of the system is, and then the hydraulic of doing some modeling and some actual stress testing in the field at the plant to see what the actual flow that could be put through the plant is. You know, the key thing, just to really touch real quickly on physical facilities, because of the amount of time that a lot of the equipment is ran, sort of some of the redundancy, lack of redundancy in some particular pieces, most of the equipment at the existing plant is is sort of nearing its downside of its life. We're looking at some cost sort of expenditures on that, just looking at what some of the equipment needs may be over the next 5 to 10 years outside of the expansion from a biological and hydraulic capacity, which are sort of a different analysis. That was something we're still working on. From a biological standpoint, I think we've talked previously that when you do the biological analysis of what is there, you could treat up to about 18 million gallons a day. The one key tight spot is the denitrification, which would have to be expanded. Denitrification filters are added for your nitrogen limit, and currently only would be able to be expanded up to about 13 million gallons a day. Now, this, I want you to keep in mind that there's two totally separate things dividing what you can treat from a biological standpoint and then what the system can treat from a hydraulic standpoint, going back to that peak discussion we discussed earlier. So from a hydraulic standpoint, we looked at the plant in its current capacity, both through doing some modeling of the existing system and also, like I said, doing some testing. We actually went out and measured levels within the basins at different flows over multiple days. What results is there are some hydraulic restrictions in the existing plant, and a lot of these are sort of seen from an operations standpoint by many of the operations staff, and are well, you know, they know there's issues with those. And basically that you're sort of limited from a hydraulic capacity without literally pumping between every single process, which is not really an operation that you want to do from a cost nor a capital outlay nor O&M perspective, of about 48 million gallons a day. So from a hydraulic analysis standpoint, what that sort of means is there's sort of two options that we looked at. Both one, to meet what your current capacity is based on what the plant was designed for. And that's a 12 MGD average flow and a 38 million gallon a day peak flow, which the peaking factor on this plant is a 3.1. So if you take that 12 by 3.1, that's where the 38 comes from. The second option is to look at a 16 million gallon a day flow. As we discussed, from a biological standpoint, we're fine up to 18. So we can, the highest we feel like we can go from a hydraulic standpoint with existing facilities with somewhat minimal improvements is up to about 16 million gallons of average flow with a 3 peaking factor, which would include doing some of the things in the collection system which are already in the budgeted process to continue to do that rehab, et cetera, within your system of about 48 million gallons a day. So to look at those just real quickly, the yellows may be sort of hard to see, but basically option one, what we would propose adding to truly get to a true 12 million gallon a day average plant that could truly treat a peak of 38, the way the system is set up now, is adding 5 million gallons of peak storage, which basically this, many different cities add storage at plants or within their collection systems themselves. This storage would simply be to be able to shave that peak in times when you have a very extreme high flow that your plant just cannot pass. And then also the only other tight spot at the plant is in the splitter box to the denitrification filters. At very high flows now, it actually overflows a separate weir and goes into the old filtration tanks when it gets to extremely high flow. So this can be resolved by raising and adjusting that box. As far as option two, looking at a 16 MGD with a 48 peak, there's a couple of additional improvements that would need to be made. Two of the same, as mentioned before, raising that splitter box to denitrification as well as the peak storage. Also, you're going to need a third train in your influence screening and grit tanks. That's what takes the big solids out of the plant as it comes in. That process is currently not big enough to be able to expand up to that 48. So that would be adding a third train as well as a pump station after that piece. Raising some of the walls within the oxidation basins themselves, which is where the primary treatment occurs. And then, as we mentioned, adding that additional filtration capacity, which is needed above the 13 from a biological standpoint. Also, the UV system in its current layout would not pass that flow, just due to the age and the technology used in that current UV system. We would propose that it'd be easier to go just to a new low-frequency UV system that is hydraulically capable of passing this flow. So, just to summarize real quickly, I mean, option two would sort of be without basically putting a brand new parallel plant at the existing site would sort of be your limitation from a treatment capacity standpoint, being able to up to a treatment capacity of 16 MGD with a 48 peaking. So you'd be able to 16 MGD biological treatment, 48 from a hydraulic standpoint. So from a cost standpoint, here's sort of the cost associated with those improvements. Option one, which very similar to the option at the water plant, where staying sort of at where you currently are is not a zero cost option. It's about $6.3 million, with option two adding an additional 4 million gallons of treatment capacity being about 18.6. So from a cost per gallon standpoint, and this does not include biosolids, which we'll talk in just a second, but it's about $12 million additional increase to add that 4 million gallons of treatment capacity. That's only about $3 per gallon, which is actually a pretty good price from a treatment standpoint for that additional capacity. We did also estimate the O&M increase, which is approximately $300,000 a year. That doesn't assume any staffing changes. That would just simply be from the additional equipment, energy usage, et cetera, from increasing that 4 million gallons of capacity. All right, then moving on to potentially a new treatment facility, either at, we've added a couple of dots to the, and this just shows that going up to 16 would ultimately be able to, from a just straight linear capacity standpoint, increase your ability to treat what demand you would have up to about 2028. The purple dot on there just shows that once again, at the 80% capacity range, you're going to be back into starting to look at, okay, what's the next step? Obviously, you've done this process, so you're going to basically have defined what that next step is going to be. But starting in approximately 2021, et cetera, at that point, the planning, design, et cetera, would have to begin for meeting that capacity, based on if the population projections were to stay the same. If it does give you that time to be able to sort of analyze what's going to happen coming out of this recession as the population and growth, is it going to continue at the pace that was sort of projected, or is it possible that it may slow down a little bit? So, I'll let Kate sort of talk real quickly about the treatment plant options at the new plant.
And we'll just run through this real quickly, but because we know that we'll have more stringent permit requirements for any new water treatment plant, what we did is we went back and looked at what technologies were available to achieve those discharge effluent qualities that we would anticipate. And there were 3 different process options evaluated. We had a workshop with the staff as well as the steering committee to work through what these were, and there were 2 biological strategies, if you will. One is called the A²O, which is one process that can be accomplished in a similar manner to what you have at the existing facility through an oxidation ditch, or that can be accomplished in a more conventional plug flow in-series activated sludge system. The other option... Right? Yes. Okay. The other option is similar from a biological...
We lost it.
I was wondering when we were going to get to the A²O.
Yeah, these are 2 processes that the EPA indicates can meet those effluent. And I don't want to spend a lot of time, but the other process option actually involves membrane filtration. The primary difference here is that you have a physical membrane as the last step. And even though the effluent quality can be identical between the 2 processes, that physical membrane sometimes gives folks a little more comfort in terms of solids leaving the facility. And so that's the 2 primary differences between the processes. We crunched through the costs.
But for the first one...
Can't have solids leaving the facility.
Well, it's in your permit, and so that's something...
I don't know much about wastewater, but...
That's a good comment to have.
That's a good one. Solids going through.
I'm with you there.
So we cranked through the cost, and I want to make sure that we talk through this potential new wastewater treatment plant has not been sited. It could be located at the existing site as a parallel wastewater treatment train. It could be sited at the Goose Creek site. So that decision's not been nailed down, but I wanted to make sure that we laid that out. There is footprint available at the existing site, but again, I want to mention that the hydraulics would require this as almost a separate plant, so you would have 2 plants at the same site.
And the key piece to remember, when it gets to siting consideration is the system, from a gravity standpoint, is designed to the collection system and the way the topography of the city works. The part south of town flows naturally to the area around the Goose Creek site. That was the reason that site was chosen. Ultimately, if the decision were to be to have all the facilities at one, you'd probably end up with a regional pump station at that facility that would then pump all that flow back up to the plant. And there is a cost that's right. There's a cost associated with that, which is also part of this whole analysis comparison.
So is building a plant at Goose Creek.
Yes, that's all of it's. None of it's cheap.
None of it's cheap.
No, and so we wanted to go ahead and begin to present these preliminary conceptual costs. They do have a very healthy contingency, and there are some differences in the costs associated with the 2 different processes. And so the next step is to work with the steering committee to select which of these 2 biological processes will be moved forward for the final analyses.
And you see we have 3 different levels there, and that's just based on the way that it would ultimately be staged. As we discussed, going up to 16 with that ultimate growth in the next 30 years of up to 24 is where sort of this 4, 6, 8 came from. So the idea being that you could either stay at 12 or 16 at the existing plant and supplement that, 4, 6, 8 in some pieces at what would be the secondary plant. As you can see, if you from a capital standpoint, I mentioned earlier, from a capital cost of increasing 4 million gallons at the existing plant, you're in the $3 to $4 per gallon range. You can see here, these costs range closer to the 7 to 8 for a brand new greenfield site.
Okay, so since these costs did not capture the biosolids handling, we're going to hop into that.
Last thing, I think we can cover it in 2 or 3 minutes, hopefully.
Okay.
So, the key, and we've talked previously before, biosolids, your current process, the decision from the staff, steering committee, stakeholders committee was to provide a more sustainable, preferably go to Class A, something that was more energy efficient, more reliable, et cetera. And so what, basically as we discussed before, your existing facility is really not any of those things. It's very little, very little processing besides dewatering, then hauling it 100+ miles to Camden, and that cost is very uncontrollable. It's not very sustainable. The rate of what that disposal fee and that tipping fee is only going to continue to increase. The cost of gas, we know no one can have a handle on that. So that sort of drove the biosolids, discussion. And as we get through the discussion of that, always keep that in mind, that really from looking at what would be the best long-term solution well into the future, it's almost like starting at zero from a biosolids facility standpoint. So the first thing we did is looked at, okay, if we're discussing 1 or 2 treatment plants, how does that affect biosolids? So we looked at a comparison of looking at different ways of the costing of the biosolids, and from a cost standpoint, what turned up is that the most cost-effective way of doing that is to have the processing at one plant, and then once a second plant, whether that be on the same site or at a different site, came on, then to manage that and get that solids to that one plant. If it was a second plant at the site, to just thicken the solids at that site and then haul that. And just for your knowledge, even at build out of 8 million gallons a day at a proposed Goose Creek site, that would still only be at the max build out about 2 truckloads a day. So we're not talking, it would be a relatively low operating cost to do that. Kay's going to touch real quick on just the 3 options we looked at.
Yeah, so similar to what we did on the wastewater treatment side, we worked with the steering committee and the staff to lay out several different process options. And each of those process options included 4 stages, which are really what's required to treat biosolids. Thickening, which we take some of the water out. Stabilization, which you kill some of the pathogens and then remove some of the what we call volatile solids. And that is actually a process you previously had, anaerobic digestion, which is one place we can actually recover some energy in the form of biogas. Dewatering, again, removes more water out of the stuff, and then drying is a process that can produce very high-quality solids that have a wide range of disposal options. And Zach's going to pass some samples around the table of a couple of process options.
Yeah, this is what you'd be looking at out of option 2 or 3, and this would be what you'd be looking at out of option 4, which actually has some potential reuse in the paving process, etc. Both of these, this is, would still have to be disposed of somewhere. This is not Class A, although it could be, like I said, reused. These are Class A biosolids, which could be reused as fertilizer, land
Dana might want to
application,
put it on
etc.
his grass in his front yard. So.
I'll pass those around.
And I think, in the interest of time, we can sort of skip through the gory details of each of these processes, and we can come back another time.
Just for information purposes too, what you produce now is more of a wet brownie consistency, basically. So you can see the difference. So.
Yeah.
That was an adequate description.
They didn't know. They didn't even know that.
So, as we discussed, these numbers here are conceptual costs for biosolids facilities. This includes total build out up to 24 over the next 30 years. This would be for basically going to a brand new 24 million gallon a day facility. You can see the costs vary pretty widely, with option one being looking at staying similar to what you do now. I will say that as we get to the O&M costs next, you'll see that the O&M costs for doing that are very expensive, just for the same reason they are now. You're still hauling a waste a long way to a landfill. But as you can see, the three new processes somewhere range, in the mid-60s to $80 million range. And these would be built in pieces. You wouldn't build all 24 million gallons immediately, but over the next 30 years would expand that facility. The key other piece here is this shows the reasoning, as we discussed, why it is much more cost-effective to build the biosolids handling at one plant as opposed to two. You can see just having the redundancy of having two fully functioning biosolids facilities is just not cost-effective.
You could have two treatment plants, but you would handle the solids at one place.
Right. And that's pretty common. That's what Nashville does, et cetera. So. Just real quickly, from biosolids O&M cost, what you see here is currently you're spending about $547 per dry ton. This is really where your payback comes over the 30 years on the process. Even though the capital costs are pretty high, you're spending $547 per dry ton to dispose of every dry ton of waste now. In the future, with some of these potential facilities, you could cut that in almost a quarter. And those numbers don't include any cost assumptions as far as gasoline, tipping fees, et cetera, which are going to continue to increase. So I think we rolled through that pretty quickly, but hopefully the main gist came through. Sort of our next steps, we're going to continue to work with staff on the collection system and can talk about some of those specific areas and look at what those rehab and replacement costs for each area will be and how much can that save us potentially from the wastewater treatment plant capacity. We may be able to move out some of that demand timetable based on being able to save some capacity within the system. We'll also continue to look at looking at costs of what it would take just over the next 10 to 15 years of just maintenance of the existing facilities, in addition to adding on to get that additional capacity from the upgrades. We want to select the process and finalize the costs, as Katie said, for the new potential wastewater treatment plant, and as well as the biosolids handling facilities, and finalize the layouts of those so we can more refine those costs and ultimately integrate all this information as we'll present back to you next month on the 13th as how it all ties back into the water quality and Stella models. So, and Mike, as far as the stakeholder workshop, we actually need to talk to the staff as well about this, but at the point we're at now, there's still just a lot of information we want to really make sure we get a good handle on. So tentatively, we're looking at probably moving that back to October now. But once again, we need to define that with the staff. And it's more of there's no reason to have a stakeholder meeting and not really be able to share every single piece with them, as opposed to having one good meeting where we can truly discuss everything that really lay everything out on the table all at one time.
So in 3 weeks, what are we going to talk about? What's part 4?
3 weeks, Kirk and Jamie will be here as well, and we'll actually walk through the water quality model and the Stella model again, and we'll actually look at some scenarios and once again sort of show you how some of these decisions working together can ultimately make differing long-term decisions on other pieces of the system. So.
Why did you say 3 weeks?
September 13th is our next meeting. We have a 5 Tuesday August, so we have an extra week between meetings next time. So your next board meeting.
You go on vacation.
Yeah.
Now is the time to go.
Any questions?
Well, don't we have a meeting on the 23rd?
This is the 23rd.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
It's a little later tonight. All right. Y'all did a great job. Great job.
Thank y'all very much.
Very good. Okay, number 8, consideration of resolution 2011-41, a resolution authorizing the issue of sewer and water revenue and tax refunding bonds in the aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $21 million of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, making provision for the issuance. I think that's enough of a caption.
Yeah. We spent some time late on Thursday evening in our Budget and Finance Committee bringing up an option that has come to our attention really literally during that meeting in some ways that causes us to revisit the refinancing options we looked at probably a month and a half ago. And I'll let Russ kind of take you through that, but it is an opportunity for a direct bank loan that we think really could meet all the goals that we set for ourselves when we looked at this previously.
When the committee went through this about 5 weeks ago, it was prior to the U.S. government debt default and the downgrading by S&P of the U.S. government and so on. So a lot of things have changed since we first looked at 4 particular ways of doing this debt. We could do competitive sale, negotiated sale, and a couple of direct loans. And the committee felt like we should go ahead with the competitive sale. Since that time, the earth has moved, and it is now more advantageous for us, and considerably more advantageous, to go into something that really looks like a direct loan with a bank. They're actually, it's really a negotiated bond sale where they're actually buying the bonds that we would buy for their personal placement. It's a considerable savings, and the resolution that we distributed late last night or early this morning changes the resolution that we had sent out previously, which was strictly for a competitive sale. I do want to point out that we put in your mailbox the letter from the state that we got at 4:03 this afternoon. And we're requested to make sure that that goes into the minutes of all of our meetings, that the state has looked at this and approved this and kind of went, wow, golly gee, how did you do that? It's a tremendous rate, and I would encourage you to pass this resolution tonight.
Yeah. So then if we do
Much
that,
better even than we ever dreamed.
It's better than the best scenario we
That's
had in
right.
competitive
Yeah.
sale. It streamlines the process.
so we do that,
What's
can we
PFM
lock
say?
in? How soon can we lock that in?
Good deal.
That is the real
That's the-
advantage, in that we can lock in, if you adopt this tonight, we
Yeah.
can lock in tomorrow morning. If we do the competitive sale, it's going to be somewhere around the 20th to the 25th of September before we sell.
No.
Rates could go back up.
They will.
But even if rates stayed the same, we're going to be better off than what PFM is telling us a
Yeah.
competitive sale would bring us, given our rating and given the Treasury
Yeah.
market.
Couple other specifics. This is SunTrust Bank who approached us as they were asking us what was going on with the refunding. They came with a specific offer. This is a non-bank qualified loan. So that was one of the concerns when we looked at this before. So that keeps our options open in terms of the ability to go to the bond market for something else if we need to. And Russ, I don't know, the rate is somewhere in the 2.425 range, depending on how you lock it in.
We have 2 options. We can go in the 2.6 something range, assuming that it doesn't move tomorrow, with absolutely no prepayment penalty, or we can lock it in at roughly in the 2.4 range with what they call a make-whole provision.
Yeah.
Is
And that
the-
means that if somewhere along the line we wanted to refund, we would have to make them whole on what their interest earnings would have been versus what they can invest the money for. But that is the direction that we're leaning, because the whole purpose of this was to lock in a rate and not refund it, and not prepay it in any
Yeah,
meaningful
and
way.
that's 15. right?
So,
And it is
15,
15
right?
years. You were shortening the term
That's
from
right.
18 down to 15, too.
It's
So
very,
that's another
it's
savings there.
Yeah, very good.
very
Good
good.
job.
Very good.
It's even better than when we had.
Okay, number 9, consideration interlocal agreement between the City of Franklin, Tennessee and Williamson County, Tennessee for the collection of sewer pipeline assessment. Are there any questions about that one?
Let me just comment on this.
We're not going to do
We
that.
had put this on both agendas. We do not want you to vote on it tonight because the county budget committee would like to look at it first, and we would like them to look at it first. So it's fine to discuss it tonight at work session if you'd like, but we're not going to ask you to vote at the voting meeting at 7 o'clock.
Next is consideration of the request for sanitary sewer availability for 9330 Clovercroft Road.
This went to CIP to
Yeah.
And we were also going to get some additional information. Eric, go ahead and
Yeah,
give a summary of where we are.
I guess a couple of the questions that came out of the committee meeting last
About a
2
week
weeks
and a
ago.
half
2
ago,
weeks
yeah.
ago.
On the 23rd.
Yeah.
No, that's
Talk to
You mean what, left hand?
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Sorry. But a couple of the questions that came out, one was, when was the house built? I was told it was built in 97. As far as they know, they haven't had any septic problems. They would like to be able to do something in their yard, but, and I'm not sure what that means exactly, if it's a pool or whatever, but where the fields are located, that's been a hindrance. So I think they were really thinking that, it's an opportunity with the school under construction, although it's really kind of it's a separate issue because the sewer did not get any closer to their property, but I think they were looking at this as an opportunity to be able to tie on. Yes, ma'am.
Is she here tonight?
She's here, but she had
Okay, because I think that was, okay.
Yeah, I had told them that there were a couple items that may take a little bit of time tonight, so.
So where are we?
But the questions that I asked, I think those were pretty much everything. If there's anything else.
So do they want to be annexed in? What's the deal there?
Did not indicate whether they wanted to.
It would be.
They did not.
They did not.
Yeah, they didn't indicate.
According to what you.
Right. Yeah. I think they just, like I said, they want to be able to tie on to sewer.
They saw the opportunity during their development of the road and sort of
It's
missed
right
that.
here. They could ask to be annexed.
See, it's already been built now.
UGB.
It's already been built.
It's
in the
right
UGB,
there,
so-
right by the city line.
But the thing
they
is,
could-
it's
The
all,
timing, I think the timing of
yeah.
it was off from.
Why don't they want to be annexed?
Do-
I mean, they haven't asked for annexation, right?
At this point, no.
No.
Are they opposed to it?
They didn't indicate one way or
Well,
the
we
other.
need to
if they're-
find that out.
That's what we wanted to hear from
Yeah.
the property owner.
What, would they be annexed by themselves? I mean, what
Well,
about?
I believe
property?
I think there's two properties that are there.
It goes
I'm
up
looking
to
at the
Clover.
map up there. I think there's two properties in that little
That's
hole.
Clovercroft right there on the
Um,
left.
Have
Are
you
they
heard
in the
from-
city?
No, I heard
No,
it's
two properties that are outside the city that are within
On
the
that side of the
UGB,
road.
right there.
It's right there next to Breezeway. Well, it's right sitting next to Breezeway. It's right there. It's right next to the city limit.
We don't
So
have
I
enough
wanna-
information, we want to bring it back
Yeah,
again.
I want more information, and I want you to ask the
And
people,
would
are
they
they
be
interested in being annexed
interested
in?
in the other parts of the neighborhood? I mean, we don't want to
Yeah,
piecemeal
all of
this.
it.
And they may not know the cost of getting to the sewer.
Right.
that's-
Yeah.
That's the next thing,
Yeah,
how
I was
much.
gonna say, what have they been,
I told them that they're, I can't remember the exact distance. I told them it was probably about 1,000 feet from the point that they would tie into.
Uphill.
Yes, it would have to be a force main, privately owned and maintained line, service line, and
Yeah.
Well, I'm
They
sorry
better-
she had to leave because this is
Information.
very important for
well, you just
her.
need to bring this back. You need to talk to them. My opinion is you just need to go back and talk to them and see what they want to do. If they're interested in being annexed with the other section of property there, since they're right there.
We'll bring it back.
And then find out if they get enough information about what they'll have
at
to
the
do.
next work session.
Okay, yeah.
So-
I mean, there's-
Yeah.
We can answer those questions. Do you want to potentially vote on it next time too, or not? I don't
Sure.
know if there's any
As long
urgency.
as long as they're
timing-wise or not.
informed of what is
No, like I
what's
said,
involved.
I think they looked at this as an opportunity. They saw that there was construction there. They thought maybe they could tie on.
As long as they understand the
And-
cost to
Not
it.
with,
Right.
not, but they don't want to be annexed.
Well, we don't know that.
We don't know that,
Yeah.
for sure, I don't.
Maybe give them a guess at what the cost is and see if
Yeah,
they're,
well-
and if
That
they're
annexation
still
is
interested. All right, number 11, consideration of liquor license
Do that.
retailer
Nice question.
certificate for the new owner of Mallory Lane Wine and Spirits. Any questions?
No.
Number 12, consideration of resolution to modify the pension plan.
We had discussed
Just
this.
to make a
Yeah.
different, make the city a trustee?
Yeah, this is
Correct.
the modification of language, and that's
Went
exactly
through
it.
it,
It moves
yeah.
from three individual positions to the city
Yep.
overall. This is essentially how we
Went
operate.
through our
it.
committee.
Number 13, consideration of custodial agreement for pension assets.
This had come through both the Pension Committee and Budget and Finance, and gone through a bid process. U.S. Bank has been identified as the selection of the committee, both committees. That is also the low-cost provider from that group of, I think we had 11 or so.
Trying to be just custodian instead of
And it is a
director.
custodial relationship
Which is-
as well.
It seems to fit us better.
And 14, consideration of sunset clause for retiree insurance option.
Again, we had discussed this at Budget and Finance. This allows the sunset or to occur for the current option, and does still provide the opportunity for health insurance, but it provides it in what's referred to in our health insurance program as option 2, which is still a very good program. It's just not quite as attractive as the one that had been open for folks. That the original sunset was July 1 or June 30 of this year. We extended it so we could do a more complete evaluation of these options, but our consultant and our HR staff are both recommending that this would be an appropriate move to go ahead and let the sunset happen and provide that one option. It simplifies it and presents some long-term savings to the city, too.
And the people that could be affected in this short period of time have either been contacted or will be contacted.
I think we've met individually with everybody.
We met with all but 2, and they have not been back to work.
On vacation.
Scheduling those.
We'll resume at 7:10.